They aren't out here chasing clout. You won't see them flexing on Instagram. But whenever Atlanta secures the bag, their cut is already guaranteed. Forget the rappers, the bright lights, and the reality stars. There is a completely different layer of money down here. It is a quiet world where a wealthy family doesn't ask for attention. They simply control the outcome. Most folks assume Atlanta's money comes from the entertainment industry. That makes for a nice story, but it is dead wrong. The real fortunes in this town were built on the boring stuff: dirt, infrastructure, private equity, and systems that never go viral but never stop printing cash. In this city, a wealthy family can pull the strings on entire zip codes, dominate whole industries, and pass the baton to the next generation without anyone ever knowing their names. Atlanta didn't earn the title of the Black Mecca by accident. It happened because families here prioritized owning the building over rocking the stage. They weren't just stacking paper, they were pouring concrete. While the famous crowd blows cash to look rich, these dynasties are acquiring assets that compound in the dark. A wealthy family doesn't lease power, they own the factory. The difference between these dynasties and your average millionaire is patience. They play the long game. Their money is spread out, locked down, and hiding in plain sight. You probably walk past their properties and rely on their businesses every single day without having a clue who actually runs the show. In this series, we are tearing down the facade. We are tracking the assets, the strategies, and the legacies of the richest African-American dynasties operating inside the A families, whose quiet power makes celebrity money look like pocket change. Quick check-in. Tell me where you are watching from. The United States? Drop a 1 in the comments. Europe? Drop a 2. Somewhere else? Drop a 3. And make sure to hit that subscribe button if you are ready to see how a wealthy family really builds an empire. Real wealth in Atlanta didn't start with a hit record. It started because folks had no other choice. Way before the city was a cultural hotspot, African-American entrepreneurs were setting up shop in the industries nobody else wanted, the quiet sectors that most outsiders ignored. That is the bedrock of every major wealthy family here. Not glitz and glam, but pure infrastructure. One of the first major lanes was essential services. Back when mainstream doors were shut, families built their own ecosystems: funeral homes, logistics, businesses you need when life gets real. These weren't mom-and-pop shops. Over time, they grew into massive operations with real estate portfolios, private fleets, and brand names that hold weight decades later. If a wealthy family controls the essentials, the cash flows, no matter what the economy does. What made these families dangerous, strategically speaking, was trust. In a game where your reputation is your currency, loyalty pays better than hype. Serving the community year after year created a predictable revenue stream, opened up land deals, and built political leverage. While everyone else was chasing risky growth, these dynasties doubled down on the things people always need. A wealthy family doesn't need to be trendy when demand is permanent. As the business grew, so did the reach. They bought properties right next to up-and-coming neighborhoods. They built facilities that screamed, "We are here to stay." Eventually, they weren't just business owners, they were institutions. Their names carried weight. When they called, people answered. Their decisions quietly dictated how entire districts developed. This chapter of the story highlights a hard reality. The biggest empires are usually built in the industries people overlook. By mastering the basics instead of the luxuries, these families created a financial backbone that allowed the next generation to take even bigger swings. As the city expanded, the next wave of families realized one brutal truth. Culture creates the demand, but control dictates who keeps the check. While music and entertainment put the city on the global map, a new class of bosses focused on the industries that shape identity itself. This is where the strategy shifted to owning culture at the source. Beauty, media, and consumer goods became absolute goldmines. These families didn't just sell products, they built entire ecosystems. Education, distribution, events, and branding all flowed through channels they controlled. A wealthy family operating in this space didn't rely on trends. They set the trends, cashed in on them, and buried the profits right back into land and private ownership. The real power move here was vertical integration. The same family owned the product, the platforms pushing it, and the convention centers where the deals went down. Trade shows, magazines, training schools, it was a closed loop of influence. If you wanted access to the market, you had to pay the toll. A wealthy family that controls the gate controls the future. This expansion reshaped the local economy. Tens of thousands of people flooded the city for industry events. Hotels packed out. Restaurants made a killing. Real estate values skyrocketed. Behind the curtain, these families were taking a cut at every layer, turning cultural clout into hard physical assets that nobody could take away. By the time the mainstream woke up, the wealth was already poured into the sidewalk. These families prove that owning the culture isn't about being seen, it is about infrastructure. And once you back that culture with land, logistics, and legacy planning, the power becomes permanent. At a certain point, it's not even about money anymore. It is about control. The families at the top knew that dirt was the ultimate multiplier. Buildings go up, trends die out, but the land decides who stays powerful. That is where the smartest wealthy family strategies quietly took over the board. While everyone else was fighting for the spotlight, these guys were looking at the map. They scooped up old warehouses, neglected blocks, and underused public land. Through partnerships and smart leases, they redesigned whole zip codes. A wealthy family didn't just put up a building, they decided how people lived, worked, and moved through the city. What made this phase unstoppable was how it aligned with public systems. Transit hubs, housing projects, mixed-use developments, guaranteed traffic backed by government dollars and private capital. These families weren't betting on hype. They were locking in decades of cash flow. For a wealthy family, infrastructure equals immortality. With that kind of footprint, influence followed naturally. Board seats, advisory roles, bank approvals, doors opened. Decisions affecting thousands of residents were made quietly in rooms these families occupied. Their wealth wasn't loud, but it was decisive. The skyline itself started to reflect choices they made years ago. This part of Atlanta's rise reveals a hard truth. Cities aren't shaped by celebrities. They are shaped by families who understand zoning laws, timing, and leverage. Once you lock down the land and the infrastructure, your power is basically impossible to move. Once the foundation was set, the next evolution was inevitability. These families didn't just own assets, they positioned themselves so that money had no choice but to pass through them. This is where a wealthy family stops reacting to the economy and starts collecting from it. Airports, transportation corridors, food services, and logistics became quiet gold mines. Millions of people move through these systems every year, spending a few bucks here and there. Individually, it's nothing. Collectively, it is a river of cash. A wealthy family that controls distribution doesn't need to be innovative. Volume does the work for them. The beauty of this strategy was predictability. Travel never stops. People never stop consuming. These businesses thrived in the booms and survived the busts. The contracts were long-term. The locations were irreplaceable. Competitors couldn't just copy the model because they couldn't even get in the door. For a wealthy family, controlling the movement meant controlling the money. As the revenue stabilized, their leverage went through the roof. Banks trusted them. The city partnered with them. Expansion got easier because the risk was already mitigated. You rarely saw these families in the headlines, yet their income streams blew the flashy ventures out of the water. This stage of the story proves a powerful lesson. The most dominant empires aren't built on excitement. They are built on the boring systems you rely on every single day, systems that, surprise, surprise, a wealthy family quietly owns. At the absolute top of the food chain, wealth isn't measured by net worth anymore. It is measured by insulation. This is the phase where a wealthy family stops worrying about economic cycles and starts engineering protection against them. Diversification becomes deliberate and surgical. Capital gets spread across land, private enterprises, essential services, and long-term contracts designed to weather any storm. If one sector slows down, another one picks up the slack. They don't concentrate risk in one flashy venture. They dilute it across the whole board. A wealthy family at this level doesn't gamble on trends, they design inevitability. What really separates these dynasties from the average rich person is governance. Decisions aren't emotional or individual anymore. We are talking family councils, private trusts, and layered ownership structures. Succession is planned years in advance. Assets are shielded from lawsuits, drama, and internal conflict. For a wealthy family, legacy isn't just an idea, it is a documented process. They start going dark. The interviews stop. The social calendar clears out. The fewer headlines attached to the last name, the safer the kingdom stays. Real influence moves into the back rooms, advisory boards, financial committees, and silent partnerships with the institutions that actually run the city. They realize power doesn't need an audience to work. That silence pays dividends that outsiders can't even imagine. Banks start offering sweetheart deals. City officials reach out first. The best opportunities land on their desks quietly, way before the public ever hears a whisper. These families don't have to hunt for deals anymore. The deals come hunting for them. This is the secret sauce of Atlanta's old money. Flashy cash brings heat. Quiet cash brings longevity. By the time the average person realizes how big these empires really are, their roots are already too deep and their assets too spread out to be knocked over. As the years roll on, their power shows up differently. The top-tier families in Atlanta stop trying to conquer new territory aggressively. They switch gears to protection, influence, and setting up the grandkids. This is the pivot point where a rich family stops being builders and starts being guardians. Schooling becomes a tactical mission. The heirs get prepped early, and we aren't just talking about grades. They get a crash course in psychology, finance, board governance, and how to keep their mouths shut. They learn to make hard calls way before they get the keys to the castle. A legacy family knows that money without self-control is gone in a heartbeat. Even their charity work changes lanes. Writing checks isn't about looking good anymore. It's a chess move. They fund the hospitals, arts centers, and startup incubators that align with their long game. Giving becomes a way to stabilize their world. They aren't just helping the neighborhood, they are hand-picking the future leaders and setting the economic agenda. Behind the curtain, their network gets bulletproof. Ties with bankers, urban planners, top-tier lawyers, and investors turn into a safety net. It's like an informal insurance policy. If trouble hits, they can fix it with a few phone calls to friends who owe them favors. You rarely face a crisis alone when you share the table with the people who make the rules. The hardest part for people to grasp about this stage is the discipline. Growth slows down on purpose. They filter out risks like crazy. They don't swing at every pitch. Knowing when to sit on your hands is just as important as knowing when to sign the check. That restraint is exactly what separates a permanent dynasty from a one-hit wonder. The families that last in Atlanta prove that being the boss doesn't mean being the loudest in the room. It's about being calm, patient, and ready. By the time the baton passes to the next generation, the machine is already humming, built to run smooth long after the founder has left the building. At this altitude, Atlanta's heavy hitters aren't competing with the neighbors anymore. They are operating on the same level as major institutions. Their choices ripple out, quietly shifting where houses get built, where businesses open, and how money flows. This is when a family stops feeling like just another local success story and starts feeling like a permanent fixture. Information becomes the ultimate asset. These guys don't wait for the evening news. They move on the early rumors, zoning changes, infrastructure blueprints, capital shifts, and population trends. By the time the public finds out, these families have already bought the land. They don't react to opportunities. They are waiting for them at the door. That kind of foresight changes how they view risk. While everyone else is gambling, these families are waiting. They only put chips on the table when the deck is stacked in their favor. Projects come with guarantees or long-term contracts attached. They minimize the downside before they spend a dime. They look immune to crashes, not because they are magic, but because they refuse to play games they can't win. Influence stops being about owning things and starts being about shaping outcomes. They steer the ship without ever signing the manifest. Through board seats, nonprofit goals, and private deals, they decide what matters. Development goes where they want it to go. Resources pile up where they've already placed their bets. Real power doesn't announce itself, it just sets the stage. Silence becomes a strategy. No more press junkets. No more flashy parties. The less people talk about the name, the fewer roadblocks pop up. It gives them the freedom to move. They can flip a decision, tweak a plan, or speed things up without 1,000 eyes watching. They know that attention just invites interference. What looks like laziness to an outsider is actually calculated patience. These families already won the growth game. Now they are protecting their spot. They let time do the heavy lifting. Money compounds in the dark. Influence digs in deeper without anyone noticing. This is the endgame of generational wealth. When your decisions determine the environment instead of just reacting to it, power isn't situational anymore. It's structural, woven right into the fabric of the city. Eventually, the goal shifts from making money to defending it. This is where the biggest dynasties in Atlanta stop worrying about getting bigger and start worrying about staying around. The expansion phase is over. Now, it's about endurance. This is where they start prepping for threats that most people haven't even thought of yet. The biggest dangers aren't in the stock market, they are inside the house. Spoiled heirs, emotional outbursts, public scandals, and family feuds destroy more empires than any recession ever could. These families fight back with structure. They define roles. They split up authority. They figure out how to settle arguments before the arguments even start. A family that stays rich understands that unity is their biggest asset. The legal setup gets incredibly complex. Layers of LLCs, trusts, and side agreements shield the money from lawsuits, politics, and bad marriages. They separate owning the assets from controlling them. They hide their tracks. What looks simple from the curb is actually backed by a maze designed to absorb punches. Resilience is engineered, not left to chance. This phase also brings in controlled innovation. The kids get to try new ideas, but with guardrails. They test new ventures on a small scale. Risk is kept in a sandbox. If they fail, it's a lesson, not a disaster. The dynasty evolves without tipping the boat. They adapt slow, deliberate, and with a long memory. To the outside world, their pull gets quieter but heavier. They don't chase relevance, the institutions come to them. Their seats on advisory councils and endowments ensure their voice is heard, even if they never say a word in public. The real superpower here is restraint. The ability to do nothing is more powerful than constant action. They filter opportunities ruthlessly. Ego gets checked at the door. Time becomes their partner. Atlanta's longest-running dynasties didn't get here by accident. It took discipline. They know that wealth that survives generations isn't explosive. It's controlled, armored, and patient-built to outlast the markets and the history books. When you look at the big picture of these power players, one thing is obvious. Lasting money is never a fluke. Every family that survives follows a pattern rooted in discipline, holding back, and thinking decades ahead. The first pattern is ownership. They pick assets over applause. They don't confuse being famous with being powerful. Real estate, infrastructure, and private equity matter more than magazine covers. While others chase clout, these families chase leverage systems that keep printing money even when nobody cares who they are. The second pattern is structure. Cash without a plan burns up fast. These dynasties obsess over governance, who takes over next, and keeping everyone on the same page. Decisions are deliberate. Risks are screened. Growth is guarded. They know a legacy isn't built on speed. It's built on staying power. The third pattern is patience. Knowing when to pass on a deal is a superpower. They vet every opportunity. They take their ego out of the equation. Time works for them, not against them. That discipline is the gap between new money and old money. But beyond the strategy, there is a duty. The best families get that their wealth shapes the world around them. They create jobs. They stabilize neighborhoods. Whole ecosystems grow around steady leadership. True success isn't just what you own, it's what you keep alive over time. The lesson here isn't to worship the rich, it's to study them. Wealth can tear things apart, or it can build them up. It can shake things up, or it can lock them down. When it's guided by discipline and a long view, money becomes a force for stability instead of chaos. I want to hear your take. Drop a 1 in the comments if ownership was the big takeaway. Drop a 2 if patience is what you need to work on. Drop a 3 if this changed how you view legacy. If you got value from this breakdown, hit that like button, share it around, and subscribe to the channel. We decode hidden power, silent empires, and the real mechanics of money that lasts.